Good morning and welcome to our online worship service. This morning we welcome you to ponder with us in a time shared by members, friends, and visitors as a congregation of people in the spirit of the First Parish of Sudbury, Unitarian Universalist. We gather this morning to find meaning, to participate in community, and maybe to find some small way to help make our communities and our lives a little bit better. This morning we gather in love with open hearts and minds, endeavoring to create a time and space where all are welcome to bring their whole self, respective beliefs, identities, gladness, and sorrows. I ask you to leave nothing about yourself behind. We love and welcome you just as you are. Friends, you will see the order of worship is available directly below the viewing window that we're in this morning. Please use it to follow along. Also, Michael has copied a version into our chat window, so feel free to open that one as well. You can also chat with each other during the worship service. This morning's reading was written by a man who lived into his life and faced into transitions such as studying and becoming an ordained Catholic priest, moving to Germany to study for his doctorate, and then moving or becoming a writer, ultimately deciding to leave the clergy in order to fall in love. I present you with the wisdom of John O'Donohue. In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. Feeling the emptiness growing inside of you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what had been outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondering, would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again, with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to risk and find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in the new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you. Please join me in saying this morning's unison chalice lighting. We gather as a house of stories. As we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes more clear. As we weave together the tales of who we are, our loneliness lessens, and the web of our oneness is revealed. As listen deeply in those times of tender trust, we descend in the longings and learnings, hopes and fears of the humanity we share. Beneath the wells from which we drink, there is a deeper well that feeds them all. Come, let us tell each other's tales of our thirst. Let us drink from the stories that sustain us all. Please join in singing this morning's hymn with us, number 38, Morning Has Broken. This morning's reading is from the book called Quiet by Susan Cain. Our lives are shaped as profoundly by personality as by gender or race. And the single most important aspect of personality, the north and south of temperament, is, as one scientist puts it, where we fall on the introvert-extrovert spectrum. Our place on this continuum influences our choice of friends and mates, how we make conversation, resolve differences, and show love. It affects the careers we choose and whether or not we succeed at them. It governs how likely we are to exercise, commit adultery, function well without sleep, learn from our mistakes, place big bets in the stock market, delay gratification, be a good leader, and ask, what if? It's reflected in our brain pathways, neurotransmitters, and remote corners of our nervous system. Today, introversion and extroversion are two of the most exhaustively researched subjects in personality psychology, rousing the curiosity of hundreds of scientists. Yet today we make room for a remarkably narrow range of personality styles. We're told that to be great is to be bold, to be happy is to be sociable. We see ourselves as a nation of extroverts, which means that we've lost sight of who we really are. Depending on which study you consult, 1/3 to 1/2 of Americans are introverts. In other words, 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know. Let us enjoy our morning's musical interlude.
For the beauty of the earth, sing, oh sing today. Of the sky and of our birth, sing, oh sing always. Nature human and divine, all around us lies. Source of all, to thee we raise grateful hymns of praise. For the beauty of the earth, sing, oh sing today. Of the sky and of our earth, sing, oh sing always. Nature human and divine, all around us lies. Source of all, to thee we raise grateful hymns of praise.
Like every auction sermon, I endeavor to cover a lot of ground, especially when our theme is all about storytelling this month. So buckle up. This morning, I want to begin with a story of the life of someone you may or may not know, the poet Anne Sexton, aka Anne Gray Harvey, who was born on November 9th, 1928 in Newton, Massachusetts. From some accounts, she had a normal childhood with 2 older sisters. Other accounts tell a very different story, but a childhood filled with abuse. She attended 2 different boarding schools, which may point to some early challenges. She married at 19, nothing abnormal about that during those times. She enrolled in modeling course at the Hart Agency and modeled for a time. She lived in San Francisco and Baltimore, and in 1953, she gave birth to her first daughter. In 1954, she was diagnosed with postpartum depression, suffered her first mental breakdown, and was admitted to the Westwood Lodge in Westwood, Massachusetts, a neuropsychiatric hospital that she would repeatedly return to for help. In 1955, following the birth of her second daughter, Anne suffered another breakdown and was hospitalized again. Her children were sent to live with her husband's parents. That same year, on her birthday, she attempted suicide. She struggled with depression, was at one point diagnosed with bipolar depression. Some contested that diagnosis, but as part of her treatment, her long-term therapist encouraged her to write. She found early acclaim with her poems. A number were accepted by the New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and the Saturday Review. She was recognized for her willingness to be vulnerable in her writing. Sexton later studied with Robert Lowell at Boston University alongside poets Sylvia Plath and George Starbrook. Within 12 years of writing her first sonnet, she was among the most honored poets in the United States, a Pulitzer Prize winner, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and the first female member of the Harvard chapter of Phi Beta Kappa, the longest-running honor society. She was a woman who rode the ups and downs of her life, writing all the while. In many ways, her writing was where she was able to transcend the challenges of her life. I chose one of her poems, Courage, centered on her thoughts about the transitions that we face, to weave in and out of this morning's sermon. Let's begin with her words about childhood. It is in the small things we see it. The child's first step as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby or poor or fatty or crazy, made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. I can imagine that many of us know this feeling of being different because we wore glasses, had hand-me-down clothes, or lived in a small home on the other side of the tracks, or that huge house on the top of the hill. Being young and naive, we trotted out into the world, open and vulnerable. Our parents hopefully protected us, ensured that we were safe. But at times, we were not safe. Riding that wobbly bike without a helmet, we were expected to be courageous when we skinned a knee. Sticks and stones could break our bones, but that lie we were told about the words not hurting us, those words did and still do hurt at times. And those words scarred far worse than any skinned knees ever could. We look at a life like Anne Sexton's and we wonder, what broke her? What sent her down the spiral? She struggled with depression, a health condition with a big stigma. I could talk about the basics of getting through the transitions of life, but sometimes it is not simple. I tell myself the equation is simple. One day, sometimes one moment at a time, day after day, facing into the challenges, facing into the darkness of depression, the emotional swings, the ups and downs of work, relationships, love, and if we are lucky enough, courageous enough, faithful enough, we make it to the other side. Anne describes in her poem, later, if you face the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage. It was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. His courage was not courage. It was love. What a great line. Mostly we do not know what another is feeling unless they open up and share the challenges and demons that they face. 1 in 5 people in the United States suffer from mental illness, and that was in 2019. Imagine what the statistic might be now after this pandemic. Mental illness is like any illness. Can be diagnosed as being mild, moderate, or severe based on too many factors and requiring a professional. Therapy, meditation, medication, having a loving, non-judgmental support system right there when you need is vital. Because transitions affect us emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, whether you have lost a job or started a new job, had a baby or lost a loved one, moved into your first home or are moving into a retirement community, whatever transition, good or bad, or somewhere in between, courage and faith are crucial for embracing the challenges that life presents us with. Tim Brainerd reached out to me this week with several thoughts, most of which deserve a sermon of their own, but one that I thought was interesting as an insight had to do with transitions. Tim wondered, our bodies are replacing cells all the time. Does that translate into a notion that transition is totally unavoidable, so embrace it? I wondered with Tim and turned to the facts provided by the scientists of the Weizmann Institute in Israel. We have so many tiny cells in our body, which live only 3 to 120 days, and lining our gut, which typically lives less than a week. Those two groups make up the giant majority of the turnover. About 330 billion cells are replaced daily, equivalent to about 1% of all of our cells. In 80 to 100 days, 30 trillion will have been replenished, the equivalent of a new you. A new you in less than 100 days. It sounds like the perfect advertisement. I personally think that internal changes, those that happen under the skin, are somewhat easier to ignore, especially when we do not feel them. Tim has a point, though. Does the knowledge that we are literally ever evolving help us to face into the fear of change? But then I thought about it. Is it actually the uncertainty that comes with change that we fear? In this life, we are expected to maintain societal norms in order to be accepted and valued. Maybe this is why There's so much stigma with regard to being traumatized by the vagaries of life. Stigmas about breaking down when facing into illness or mental illness or an unforeseen circumstance and needing help to move forward can define one as being weak. That need of help. I, for one, do not believe that if we ask for help, we are weak. Getting help, in my opinion, shows how strong we actually are. Anne Sexton wrote later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone. Getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow. You gave it a back rub, and then you covered it with a blanket, and after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. The wings of the roses. Now that is a palpable romantic image. If we unpack that a little bit more, wings spread in order to rise from the darkest places, the places where the thorns remind us of our humanity, where anxiety punctures our repose, a place where we question everything. What are the emotions that color our world? Gray seeps out, especially when we're feeling wrung out like a sock. Maybe it is when you hit that birthday that makes you feel a bit older, or your work does not speak to you anymore, or difficult places in life grab you and pull you down. I mean you, because we are all different with regard to the challenges and the transitions that we face. There is no generalization that fits us all. And reminds us that later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with a calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. In the comfort of your slippers, you will stride out. Those comfortable shoes we wear that exemplify who we really are. I think about bunny slippers. Living through this life we can probably count off the transitions. We know that moment where we had to act, where we felt all the feelings, where we were called to make a leap. Making that leap, I believe, was an act of faith. Took an act of faith. And as I shared earlier, we need all of the stuff, therapy, meditation, medication, a loving, non-judgmental support system right there to catch us as we fall. My friends, we are all struggling. Even though we put on our best game faces, there is no denying that one fact. Some of us struggle quietly, alone, while others are big about their feels. With this said, there is a whole lot of ground in between, and we all have different levels of tolerance for a display of emotion or challenging behavior. We may be quiet and shy. We may be loud and boisterous in those moments of transition. We are all different. Jan Hardenberg sent me some thoughts this week about the different ways that people think. He began with a statement that introverts are not always introverts. The last 2 books I read said our communities need both introverts and extroverts to survive. He went on to explain that cerebral specialization expands our species' computational capacity, yet each individual must rely on others to supply what's missing. I couldn't agree with Jan more. He then shared a quote that explained, it's important for humans to have many kinds of minds because variation is critical for the survival of the species. One of Charles Darwin's greatest insights was that variation is a prerequisite for natural selection to work. Tim Brainerd shared a story with me about personality styles. It's a story about an insight that Tim had about his brother-in-law. I won't name any names. How at work, being an appliance salesman, his brother-in-law chose to listen over talking, was not pushy in order to get sales, which is an introverted trait. On the other hand, at home, he was a party animal, which was extroverted. Tim went on to explain that family gatherings at his brother-in-law's home were not to miss events. Tim's brother-in-law was able to negotiate and be flexible enough to bring the traits that he needed when he needed them most, which is truly a gift. Introversion and extroversion are polar opposites, with a whole lot of gradation in between. Most dualities have a sliding scale. In expanding this topic from transitions to incorporate personality types, let us be mindful that the intersection of this topic is interesting and complex. Depending on who one is personality-wise, affects on how they respond to the transitions of their lives. That is why I decided to weave these two topics together, giving you a twofer. I always want to be clear that I do not have a preference for a specific personality type. Believe it or not, I'm right at 50% with regard to being introverted and extroverted. Doesn't make it anything any easier, I'll just tell you that. Sometimes I'm big and loud, while other times I'm quieter. Sometimes I'm moving through the world feeling confident, while at other times I feel awkward in any given situation. I have no control on which part of me will become dominant. I have to make the leap a lot in my life, and I confirm that faith is what helps me do that. Not faith in God per se, but faith in my ability to survive the fall, as well as stick that landing. What I've realized being a 50%er is that I might go either way with regard to transitions. I may share my thoughts from the beginning about what I'm feeling or thinking about a transition or challenge, or I might just stop speaking altogether. That does actually happen. Sometimes I try to push through in order to find the words. Unfortunately, at other times, I'm just not able to get there. It has taken work on my part to evolve in order to realize what is going on for me, because at times it's not clear-cut or straightforward. Several years ago, I found a jewel of insight when I read a book called Quiet, written by Susan Cain. It is fantastic and looked at the various ways that we each think differently, and how we need all types of people in this world to maintain a sense of equilibrium. Cain spoke about the extrovert ideal in our American culture, and how in the 1920s, popular self-help guides had changed their focus from inner virtue to outer charm. To know what to say and how to say it, as one manual put it, to create a personality of power, advised another. Try in every way to have a ready command of the manners, which makes people think he's a mighty likable fellow, said the third. That is the beginning of a reputation of personality. Success Magazine, Saturday Evening Post introduced departments instructing readers on the art of conversation. With this in mind, our society, the accolades and attention naturally went to those who had the gift of gab, those extroverted and charismatic folks. It has been this way for about 100 years. Those who were considered successful were the ones who could sell anything in large measure, and this is still true. But the value between personality types has begun to be noticed and valued. The skill set of the introvert can be seen in engineers, mathematicians, scientists, artists, and poets. People will look seriously at the whole and yet work through the minutiae carefully. How important is it to have those amazing minds that require solitude in order to focus on the matters at hand? I share with you a story. Let's imagine for a moment that it is March 5th, 1975, a cold and drizzly evening in Menlo Park, California. 30 unprepossessing-looking engineers gather in the garage of an unemployed colleague. They called themselves the Homebrew Computer Club, and that was their first meeting. Their mission to make computers accessible to regular people, no small task at the time, when most computers were temperamental, SUV-sized machines that only universities and corporations could afford. In walked an uncertain young man of 24, a calculator designer for Hewlett-Packard. Serious and bespectacled, he had shoulder-length hair and brown beard. He took a chair and listened quietly as the others marveled over a new build-it-yourself computer called the Altair 8800. That young man was Stephen Wozniak, and he was excited to be surrounded by kindred spirits. To the homebrew crowd, computers were a tool for social justice, and he felt the same way. Not that he talked to anyone at that first meeting. He was way too shy for that. But that night, he went home, sketched his first design for a personal computer with a keyboard and a screen just like we use today. 3 months later, he built a prototype of that machine. 10 months after that, he and Steve Jobs co-founded Apple Computer. What a historic power partnership, the two Steves, Wozniak and Jobs, one an introvert, the other an extrovert. Jobs was the smooth talker, numbers guy, and purveyor of ideas. Wozniak, the engineer, made it all happen. Jobs wanted to be on brand and look good. Wozniak wanted his new computer to be integrated, software and hardware, with rock-solid technology that was financially accessible. Together, they were able to support one another through product specification, user interface, and the challenges, growth, and changes that Apple went through over a decade. I wonder, though, unless you're a geek like me, how many of you knew that there were two Steves at Apple? Woz, as he was called, never got the accolades or the attention that Jobs did, except from the geeks. Disgruntled, Woz left Apple on February 6, 1985. He was frustrated that the company was shifting priorities and his opinions were far from being acknowledged. Steve Jobs also left Apple that same year, but in contrast to Jobs, whose skill set made him masterful negotiator, marketer, and editor of ideas, Wozniak always seemed happier before Apple's expansion. He worked best in small teams of engineers, crafting one or two person creations. Woz was ever the introvert and Jobs the extrovert. It took them both working together to create and make Apple what it was. To better understand this dynamic between personality opposites, how they operate and are cultivated, nature versus nurture, studies in developmental psychology began. In 1989, Jerome Kagan, one of the great developmental psychologists of the 20th century, launched a study at Harvard. Kagan devoted his career to studying the emotional and cognitive development of children. In a series of groundbreaking longitudinal studies, he followed children from infancy through adolescence, documenting their physiologies as well as their personalities along the way. One of those studies, launched in 1989 and still ongoing, Professor Kagan and his team gathered 500 4-month-old infants in his laboratory, predicting they'd be able to tell on the strength of a 45-minute evaluation which babies were more likely to turn into introverts or extroverts. Kagan and his team exposed the 4-month-olds to a carefully chosen set of new experiences. The infants heard tape recording voices and balloons popping, saw colorful mobiles dance before their eyes, and inhaled the scent of alcohol on cotton swabs. They had widely varying reactions to the new stimuli. About 20% cried lustily and pumped their arms and legs. Kagan called this group the high reactive. About 40% stayed quiet and placid, moving their arms or legs occasionally, but without all the dramatic limb pumping. This group Kagan called low reactive. The remaining 40% fell somewhere between these two extremes. In a startling counterintuitive hypothesis, Kagan predicted that it was the infants with the high reactive group, the lusty arm pumpers, who were most likely to grow into quiet teenagers. The high reactive infants, the 20% who hollered at the mobiles bobbing above their heads, were more likely to have developed serious, careful personalities. The low reactive infants, the quiet ones, were most likely to have become relaxed and confident types. High and low reactive tended to respond, or correspond, in other words, to introversion and extroversion. All of this makes me wonder if we are genetically hardwired to be either introverted or extroverted. Kagan initially said that we were, but then he evolved his thinking to explain that anyone can modify their behavior based on circumstance. If we need to do public speaking, even though we are anxious, we can get ourselves there by daring to take the leap. So how do introverts and extroverts handle the transition of our lives? It seems obvious to me. Either quietly, making well thought out strategic decisions, not moving until they are ready, and then doing so with a small consortium of close allies. Or loudly, with a lot of external processing, as they try to sort out the most advantageous means with everyone involved. Between the two, I do not think that one or the other is better. They're just different. But if you combine the two, like we saw with the two Steves, you have the best of both worlds, and the magic will abound. Let's turn back to Anne Sexton's story, who was brilliant and suffered from mental illness. She presented differently based on what she was experiencing internally as well as her external struggles. What a complex set of circumstances to negotiate. She was described as a housewife with a high school education, started writing poetry in a mental hospital in 1957. A decade later, she won the Pulitzer Prize. Sexton became a literary star because she was an exceptional poet. Sexton panicked whenever she left the house. She yearned to browse in bookstores and libraries, but couldn't go unless a friend accompanied her. Grocery stores, drugstores, and department stores terrified her. As poetry began to provide an emotional outlet and a path to independence, Sexton sought connection with other poets. I belonged to the poets, she wrote later. I was real there. But at other times, she was different. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. She was also sophisticated and flamboyant at a time when poets wore bookish conservative clothes, as Adrienne Rich put it when she met Sexton in 1959. I didn't expect her to be such a knockout, tall, tan, wearing white, looking very gorgeous. Later, when Sexton applied for a grant at Radcliffe, the committee considering her wrote comments like, "Wow, and we'll know she's around. She has enormous vitality and zest." At times, Sexton's behavior was an attention-catching as her appearance. At a conference, she was described as aggressively seeking the attention of instructors, always asking the same question: does this poem have a voice? My voice. Through all of Anne's ups and downs and the challenges that she faced, she clearly reached for courage through the transitions of her life. She was able to take the leap on occasion, and based on the situation that she was in, she was fearless and that she reached for help when she needed it. At other times, she was held back by the condition of her inner environment. It seemed that she, like many of us, cycled between introverted and extroverted behavior within the framework of her health and circumstance. That same flexibility can help one through the transitions of their life. It's also important, if you are part of an introvert and extrovert couple, that it takes negotiation and compromise in order to get things done amicably. Balance when facing challenges, or collaboration in creating a balanced social calendar. If you are wondering, there is an easy way to determine whether one is an introvert or an extrovert. It can be found in how we recharge ourselves. Do we need to have some quiet downtime to recharge, or do we get recharged by being around people? Quiet downtime equals introvert. Being with people equals extrovert. In closing, I want to share some thoughts from Susan Cain, which I felt were truly helpful. Love is essential. Gregariousness is optional. Cherish your nearest and dearest. Work with colleagues you like and respect. Scan new acquaintances for those who might fall into the former categories or whose company you enjoy for its own sake. And don't worry about socializing with everyone else. Relationships make everyone happier, introverts included, but think quality over quantity. Secret to life is to put yourself in the right lighting. For some, it's a Broadway spotlight. For others, a lamp-lit desk. Use your natural powers of persistence, concentration, insight, and sensitivity to do work you love, work that matters. Solve problems, make art, think deeply. Figure out what you're meant to contribute to the world and make sure you contribute it. If this requires public speaking or networking or other activities that make you uncomfortable, do them anyways. Whether the story we share is Anne Sexton's or the two Steves, Jan's insights, Tim's story about his brother-in-law, or whatever your own personal stories might be, it takes courage and faith to take that leap that will carry us over and through the transitions of our lives that we will inevitably face. Just remember that as long as you reach for help, there will be someone on the other end willing to bandage those skinned knees. I promise you. I invite us to share a moment of silent reflection, meditation, and prayer. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Thank you for your time and treasure to support the good work of First Parish. We accept your offering this morning via mail, dropping off a check to First Parish, texting your offering, or designating your offering online. You can find directions on how to participate in our online giving in our order of worship. Thank you for your generosity. Let us join in our extinguishing of the chalice, which is located in your order of worship. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Good and loving people, our time in worship has come to an end, so I share these words with you in the hopes that they will inspire you along your way. Written by T.S. Eliot. What we call a beginning is often the end. To make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from the exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So may it be. Blessed be. Amen.